Wikipedia took down its site for the night. Google blacked out its logo. It was all part of a global protest against proposed US laws that would give the government powers to shut down websites. So despite its public commitment to free speech, how free is the internet in the West? Hello and welcome to A Simple Question with me, Phil Rees. Today I'm outside Google's UK headquarters. After last summer's English riots, Prime Minister David Cameron told Parliament that he needed to shut down social websites if they were, in his words, encouraging violence or disorder. So, are governments now trying to control websites? Well, before we find out what the public thinks here on the streets of London, here's a short video clip.
Across Europe and the United States, ordinary citizens have been protesting against a series of bills that threaten the online freedoms they want to protect. Two bills that were discussed in US Congress include the Stop Online Piracy Act, or SOPA, and its sister legislation, the Protect IP Act, or PIPA. Though the laws are presented as targeting piracy and breaches of copyright, there is widespread criticism for fears that they will censor free speech and the right to access public information.
That none of the bills do what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to stop online piracy and they're supposed to protect intellectual property, and neither one of them do that. What they do is they suppress user content, they suppress our voices.
New media companies, including Wikipedia and Google, also oppose the bills. They say the bills are based on a fundamental lack of understanding of how the internet works and would cripple the internet as well as online businesses.
Both of these bills are extremely dangerous to the tech sector, to companies like Reddit, and also to the way the internet works right now. They're very broad, they're very vague, they're technically just ignorant, and they are really set up for abuse.
These laws have revived the international debate about how much power governments should have over the internet.
Free flow of information can be used for good, but it can also be used for ill.
In the UK, during the civil unrest last August, David Cameron proposed censoring social media websites such as Facebook and Twitter as a response to civil unrest, a proposal that was praised by China's state media site Global Times. In fact, the UK has a series of different laws that already restrict the free flow of information on the internet. The Official Secrecy Act makes it an offence to upload leaks from civil servants even if that information is in the public interest. In 2008, the United Nations Committee on Human Rights warned that the UK defamation law negatively affects civil and political rights of British citizens. In addition, for the last 3 years, the UK has been one of the 39 countries that have been secretly discussing ACTA, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement. Though it's supposed to tackle large-scale counterfeiting, ACTA has been criticised as having no democratic ability. It is seen as a threat to public privacy and freedom of speech and innovation. Since the dawn of the internet, governments across the West have been making attempts at taking more control over the way information is shared and made accessible to the public. So is the freedom of information in the West really as democratic and free as we think?
A Simple Question is a show that discovers the views of the public here on the streets of London. I began today by asking what people think about freedom of information in the West. Is the internet as open and free-flowing as people would like?
I think it's important that all information's free for everybody to access. And I do think that they go a bit too far with censorship nowadays.
What's your opinion of kind of freedom of information on the internet in the West? Is it free enough?
Well, I think it is. I don't think there's been many restrictions outside of countries like China, and I think that as soon as you start to lock it down, once you start at one point, then when do you stop?
I think information should be free for everyone as a general rule, really. I don't think hiding it benefits anyone in any way.
I guess in the West it's more about, it's less restricted, people are able to speak their mind more, and I suppose it's a lot more freer, I guess.
There are laws. I mean, like in Britain, we have the Official Secrets Act, which does restrict what should go on the internet. Do you believe that something like that is necessary?
It depends on the content, really, and the context and what's being restricted.
Because the information will be on view for everyone to view. Maybe a lot of the people that may be offended by specific types of information that are placed on the specific websites or anything like that. Anything rude or anything like that, fair enough, but depending on what it is.
I think that information sharing is very important, but then again, it depends what you are sharing. I mean, personal information is personal, and it's not right to share it between different parties.
But there are laws in the West, and there are laws in Britain to restrict the internet, such as the Official Secrets Act. When certain governmental information, they can bring that down. They have legal powers to stop that. I mean, is that a good thing, or is that necessary?
We can't influence it anyway. So if it's good or bad, maybe it's good when you can express your opinion, and but what to do in this situation?
I think they probably need to protect people, but I think you have to be careful that it doesn't allow people to control what other people say, and we should have access to everything, really.
Well, those were the views of the public here on the streets of London. Let's now find out what our experts have to say.
There are a whole number of ways that the state actually tries to stop confidential information being spread, and I think in general that's a bad thing. There's also, leaving aside the kind of legislation side of things, it's worth remembering that the internet is kind of still dominated by the big corporate players, despite all the advantages that it has and the opportunities that it provides for people who want to spread information. The fact of the matter is, most information is generated online by the kind of big news organisations, the big entertainment organisations, and so on and so forth. So it's an illusion to think that the internet is this kind of horizontal world where everyone is equal. Information is still very much controlled both by the corporations and to a certain extent by government. One of the wonderful things about the internet is that it gives you potentially, it gives any citizen anywhere in the world unlimited access to the kind of fruits of human civilization, if you like, and for that to be to argue that's a bad thing is just bizarre in my opinion. But the corporates want to move in because they're not making money out of it. They're not making sufficient money out of it. So that's one side of ACTA. The other side is that I think behind this kind of corporate agenda, there's a slightly more sinister side to it, which is that the governments are trying to find ways to access private information and to limit the flow of information of other kinds which may not have any kind of commercial bearing at all but is detrimental to them. They don't want WikiLeaks to happen again, and that's one of the other reasons why they're introducing this legislation. So as far as I'm concerned, on both counts, we should be opposing the various new proposals, the various new potential laws. We want the free flow of information, and we want popular access to the sort of history of human civilization. Why not?
Frankly, publishing companies, they want to be the people deciding what we do and don't see, and that's because they make money out of that process, and they're threatened by situations where users sometimes recycle parts of that content or just simply able to satirize those companies and maybe records or whatever. They don't like this. They also don't like the idea that if a company is close to the edge on what is or isn't legal in copyright, that they shouldn't be able to just sort of say, well, no, that we don't want. And that's what they're after, is sort of control. And that may seem reasonable from their point of view, but from a user's point of view, it is not reasonable. What we as citizens need to do is to be able to say, well, if something has infringed somebody's copyright, if something has crossed a border and shouldn't have happened, then it's up to the copyright owners to sort of show that, say it, and then remove the content. That's what happens on YouTube, for instance. Somebody uploads a bit of television or something to YouTube, it gets pulled down. Governments do have a right to their own privacy, if you like. Any government has a right to say, we need to keep certain secrets because we're worried about national security. There are some things we know which it would endanger everybody if these secrets simply got out. Now, that's reasonable. Similarly, there's quite good reasons why governments may need to negotiate in secret with each other or plan in secret. The problem is when that becomes either a pervasive culture or where the information that citizens need to keep their governments into account, when that's restricted. And I think, again, we see a big battle between government departments who are not always particularly wanting to give information out and citizenry. I think they just haven't thought the problem through at this point, because censorship, it implies a few things. Firstly, it implies that whatever you're censoring is dangerous. So if you censor something purely because you don't like it, the person who censored looks like a victim. They also look like somebody whose opinions really ought to be looked at properly because they're posing some sort of threat to the people who demand the censorship. So you tend to hand a propaganda victory and make these people look more important when you censor them. And it also, I think, from a citizen's point of view, you have to ask, well, who is the government to judge what I can or cannot read? I want to be the person who judges what I can and cannot read. And if the government is being that patronising to say that I can't really make a decision, then it's in my interest to find out what that information is so I can judge for myself. Because otherwise I'm letting the government get far too much power over me.
In the United States, new laws such as SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act, threatens to restrict internet freedom and is being introduced in order to serve the interests of big business. Prime Minister David Cameron shut down social media sites during the English riots, an act praised by Chinese state media. So, are Western governments now trying to curb the internet?
I suppose there is an industry being supported there by the purchase and it's an industry I'm part of and I'm very interested in keeping up. So in that respect, I'm up for doing away with piracy altogether, because I do think people lose out in that case.
There are laws that are proposed in the United States now that are being brought in to protect big business, the record companies, film companies, and prevent piracy. Do you think that's a good thing?
Yeah, definitely. Yes. See, piracy is not the right thing to be doing, and we should be supporting the music industry by paying for our music and not illegally downloading it. So, completely I agree with.
They are a little bit. Especially with all the little bits that you don't necessarily think or realise certain implications. With things like SOPA, and was going to give sort of governments the authority to just completely close down websites. And there's, I don't think censorship is a good thing anyway.
I think we like to think that we're living in a democracy. I think it's a thin veil. I don't think it's quite there just yet.
David Cameron, who's British Prime Minister, of course, he said governments must not use cybersecurity as an excuse for censorship. Obviously, he's talking about about countries that do that. Yet he did exactly that when he ordered social media to shut down during the London riots. Is there a bit of hypocrisy there?
Well, we were talking about this the other day because we're saying that that the battle wasn't just about the people on the streets, the battle was about social media being able to, as a weapon for them. But when they shut that down, they also shut down the people that were trying to protect themselves, about their ability to secure their homes and get information about where the rioters were. So no, I don't think anyone wins in that situation.
Well, no, because it should just be down to the individual. I know that some people are led astray, but it should be down to us to decide what's right and what's wrong, not for the government to decide for us. So.
I don't really think they should have anything to do with social networks and all of that. I don't think the government should really have anything to do with that.
The view there of the public. Well, what do our experts have to say?
The question is, who's doing the regulating and in what interests? And what we're seeing here is this constant temptation on the part of the authorities to use kind of spurious arguments about national security, about decency and obscenity and so forth, to actually close down legitimate free speech. And I think this is what is happening all the time. And it's kind of mirrored in the general obfuscation around terrorism law, which is, you know, constantly used to sort of infringe civil liberties, to threaten and challenge people who are just wanting to have a debate, you know, and this is a big problem. Like so many other technologies which have the potential to be, you know, unbelievably liberating for humanity, the future of the internet will depend on what happens in wider society, because it is, you know, at the moment, it is ultimately it is controlled by. I mean, there's a struggle for control over it, but you know, the corporates and the national governments and the international bodies, regulatory bodies. In the end of the day, they will have their way unless we're campaigning very, very hard for you know, to stop them clamping down. But if we're really to realise the potential of the internet and the web, then we really do have to change the relations that exist in society more generally. You know, it seems to me such a fantastic tool to institute really deep-seated democracy, to be able to work out very, very quickly people's needs in different parts of the world and how we can match people's needs to the production that is happening at any one time.
Governments have a huge say in internet regulation. They already decide pretty much what websites are allowed to stay up. They have laws around things like data protection to protect our privacy. There are laws around defamation and libel, copyright. A huge number of things regulate what is online already. The question that they sort of want to take a bit further is actually whether they can do things like switch the internet off at times, and they do examine these questions, and I can understand why again a politician who's not really thought the issue through is prepared to say in the sort of heat of the moment, rioters used Blackberries, let's shut down Blackberry networks. And that's pretty much what got said in the summer when the riots took place in London and elsewhere. But it's a tremendously naive sort of way of looking at this. What's going to happen when somebody's in a building and it's burning and they're trying to find anything to communicate with in order to warn people that their life is in danger, and then they find that the government's clamped down on all of the media and shut it all down? That person's going to find themselves either highly, you know, their life really in danger, or even worse, maybe they die. You know, so you cannot just say bad people are using this technology, we'll switch it off, because other people depend on it too. If, on the other hand, we're talking about WikiLeaks, and we think about how there you have users who are saying, right, if people are going to have government information which actually people need to get hold of, then we will publish it. Then again, I think that's a different thing, and I think we have to be quite careful about exactly what people, how they respond to that. WikiLeaks in the United States was heavily criticised and in fact came under state attack. You know, the people in US government rang round all of the credit card agencies to say, stop allowing these people to get money, pull their accounts, cancel their accounts. They did that without any reference to courts. They didn't try to prove them guilty of anything. It isn't even likely that WikiLeaks actually had made an offence by publishing the United States documents, the cables that it published. The person who actually broke the law in getting those cables published was the person who leaked them in the first place, allegedly Bradley Manning. Now, he may have broken the law, or somebody else like him broke the law, and that person is then subject to the law and might go to prison for it. But WikiLeaks, in the United States context, is not breaking the law by publishing that material. it's engaging in its free speech rights. And that's very important for the freedom of the press, actually. That's how freedom of the press in the United States is guaranteed, because, you know, how else do you decide that, you know, you can hold the government to account except by protecting the position of the media when whistleblowers give them vital information? So I think it's important with WikiLeaks to just sort of remember they haven't really done anything wrong here. That if an individual's leaked information, they may have done.
Wikipedia is an example of a website whose content is regulated by the users themselves. So, does the government have any right to control the internet at all? And finally, what's the internet likely to look like in the future? Can anyone tell that? Well, let's find out what the public thinks.
I think it's, you know, it's part of the police and the government's job to regulate things which are damaging or, you know, that could hurt people or cause serious problems. But, you know, things like Wikipedia, most of the content is just, you know, like you say, it's regulated by the users and they actually oversee what goes on there. So I don't think it's, you know, no one would say it was criminal or, you know, hurting anybody. So it seems a shame to, you know, stop things like that.
Wikipedia is an example of a website that's regulated by users. I mean, do you think that governments have a role to regulate it, or is stuff like Wikipedia a good thing?
Wikipedia is fantastic. Apparently the information in Wikipedia is far more accurate than most of the encyclopedias that have been written over the decades. And if it wasn't for Wikipedia, I would not be as intelligent as I am right now, you know. And my children use it all the time for schools, and it's a great source of information. And the fact that people are contributing freely to that, that's the way the world should work. We shouldn't be all trying to find a way to make a penny out of everything.
Wikipedia, that should be for the public to control. I don't think corporations or politicians should change Wikipedia, because that's just a great page to look information.
In this case, I know Wikipedia is things that we put, we can update them and that's cool and that's nice, and I like it. That's like that, but the way they're trying to do it is not the way, because it should be by us, I think.
Well, the internet, you could argue, is a wonderful tool for uniting people. How do you see that evolving in the future globally?
I think it'll just develop on from what it is. It's a massive communication tool. Everyone keeps in contact through it. Not too sure on sort of political side of that, but
I don't think people will let it. I think that they'll continue using it in their own ways. There might be problems, there might be trouble caused by that, but yeah, I think that it's going to continue in the same way. I don't think it's going to change, really.
I think if it's sold by a government, it won't be the same. It won't be the same, because I've met people, incredible people, through internet, and I would never thought that like 5 or 6 years ago. And if they control in a bad way, I think those things may change.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for this week. If you've got something to say yourself, send an email to asimplequestion@presstv.com. That's asimplequestion@presstv.com. Meanwhile, I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.